Well, let's look more closely now at the reaction of Cuban exiles within the United States. When Barack Obama became president back in 2009 and said he wanted to end Cuba's isolation, I sat down at one family gathering in Washington, D.C. to talk about how that might happen. I heard from the family's Aunt Lala, who'd been imprisoned and exiled, about the family losing its wealth in Cuba's revolution. Also from the younger generation, eager to normalize relations but not at any price. Here's just a snippet of our conversation 5 years ago as first Manny Hidalgo, then his sister Bibi Hidalgo shared their concerns about the way the US might open up to Cuba. Manny Hidalgo strongly backs President Obama's message of change, but still he'd love to see the Castro regime making concessions.
In terms of releasing political prisoners or opening up the economy or, allowing for freedom and democracy to take root in Cuba, to just end it whole cloth, I think would be perceived by some in the exile community as insulting.
And Manny's sister, Bibi, is thinking long-term. She doesn't want the island thrown back into what she calls a patriarchal relationship with its bigger, richer neighbor.
We could completely lift the travel ban and increase exponentially. And does that mean that, you'll be at a hotel having conversations with people who are making mojitos for you, and they have engineering degrees and they're doctors and they're lawyers, and how do we move that relationship from handing that person a $2 tip to paying that engineer $20,000 to see his plans for building a structurally sound bridge?
Well, joining me from Washington now are Cuban-Americans Bibi Hidalgo, who you just saw in that report, and her brother Patrick Hidalgo, who are meeting for the first time today, both of whom have been actively engaged to try to bring about change in the matter of US-Cuban relationships. Welcome, both of you, to World News Today. Bibi, first, can I ask you what you make of today's developments?
I think it's a very positive step forward. As the president indicated last night, this is about extending a hand of friendship to the people in Cuba. And that's where our work has focused over the last decade, is how can we make the relationship community to community. And that's ultimately what his decision was about in normalizing relations. What can we do to really support the Cuban community at this time, and especially after 50 years of a policy that really hasn't been able to move the needle forward?
Patrick Hidalgo, I should also point out to our viewers that I believe you were President Obama's Hispanic Outreach Director for Florida in 2008 and really increased the Democrats' share of the Cuban-American vote then. This is something presumably for which you have long campaigned.
Yes. Well, thanks for having us, Philippa. It was interesting. Bibi and I first worked on this issue from a position of organizing church leaders in Miami back in 2002 to 2004 and trying to create a safe space for just having normal conversation around the issue of how do we better understand people in Cuba and how do they understand the diaspora and sort of heal the wounds of the past. In 2007, I did have the honor to work on the campaign and go down to Florida and organize all Latinos in Florida, but of course, any political party keeps a very close, conversation with Cuban Americans to understand where are they and what do they support. And what was great, what's been phenomenal about our journey over the last several years is to see how the Cuban American community itself has really evolved and gotten to a place where it is ready. And for the most part, a majority of people embrace this type of move and are ready to give it a chance and get rid of a policy of 50 years of complete isolation, which, as Bibi said, hasn't really worked, and try something different. Try engagement that is focused on the people and not so much on castigating the government for its actions, per se.
Bibi, you spoke to me several years ago now about your concerns about the way that Cuba might open up, that it shouldn't be exploited, I think, as you saw it. Do you still have those concerns today?
Definitely, in terms of just having kind of unbridled tourism on the island. And that's where I think the approach of the administration has been really smart, because this is, again, about fostering more people-to-people contact. It's what they call purposeful travel. And that's what you see in terms of the changes. It's encouraging people to go and to engage with the community, to hear about their experiences and to share our own here in the United States, and not about just blanket tourism that's not necessarily going to empower people on the island.
Patrick, you referred to the big political debate there has been about whether this is a wise move, and some dissidents have said, look, this is a betrayal because Cuba is still politically repressive, there are still opponents of the regime in jail. How can we do this? What's your answer to that?
You know, the best way I've heard this described, one of my very good friends who co-founded a group called Roots of Hope said he heard once from actually a Republican official that the best way to deal with a country like this, like Cuba, is you extend the hand of friendship and start the dialogue, become relevant to what's going on the island. And with the other hand, you push for the change that you want. So what's fascinating to see now is how the U.S. is in a position where this isn't just about U.S.-Cuba, it very much affects the U.S. relationship and credibility with all of Latin America. So now when the U.S. speaks with our partners, the leaders of Brazil and Mexico and Colombia and so many other countries, we can actually tell them, okay, we have done what you have been asking us to do for decades, and we are trying a new approach on Cuba. Now we all need to be in unison in pushing for actual human rights change in Cuba. So, of course, you know, this is a really complex issue. It is not a black and white issue. The dissidents have every right to say what they believe should happen. But what's also interesting is Cuba is a complex society. It's got a robust, nascent, emerging civil society. There are a number of religious leaders and writers and intellectuals that are very much for this. And just the average person on the street, they want to be able to get more money for their paladar or their casa particular, and getting an extra couple $1,000s from the U.S., as any entrepreneur would know, is a game changer. Now they're going to build up a new economy in Cuba, and that, the research shows, and all political scientists agree on that, people need to reach a certain baseline level of economic well-being before they really push for the political change that they want. And we haven't had that in Cuba, and that's going to change.
I'm sorry that we have to leave it there, but Patrick and Bibi Hidalgo, thanks so much for joining.